So, Brad, I got to tell you, today I am pumped full of acetaminophen and ibuprofen because yesterday I took delivery of 10 pallets of Drive books. And, it sounds like an old vaudevillian joke, but boy, are my arms tired. But I really am tired. I'm really tired.
I was wondering about that because that's about twice as many as I've ever taken at one time. That's a lot of pallets to Tetris into your storage space and all of that. And you know, we're not as young as we used to be. And I was wondering how slowly you were going to be moving today.
The answer is very slowly. Let me just tell you that it was uncomfortable how long it took me to get my socks on this morning. That's all I'm going to say about that. It took forever. Anyway, 10 pallets of books is, like you, it's actually more than double. I think the most I'd ever previously taken was 4 pallets at a time.
Yeah.
And 10 pallets, the reason why that happened was I'm in a weird situation with Drive where by the time I get to the third book, the first book has sold out, so I need to reprint that one. So now every Drive book going forward, when I get to book 4, I've now scheduled it where I'm going to have to reprint book 2. And it just makes for an impossibly large shipment of books all at once. And it was a lot. But Brad, like an excited 10-year-old kid that got invited up to the cockpit to see the pilot and where they work, you know, I got to go inside the truck to help push a double tall pallet. And I was like, oh boy, look at me. I get to go inside the truck. This is fun.
That is kind of neat, though. And he had one of those pallet jacks. Did he have a motorized pallet jack, or was it just a push one?
Yes, the motor in this case was Dave Kellett getting to go up into the truck because there were 2 pallets. I don't know why they did this. There were 2 pallets that were double talls, which actually worked out great for what we ended up needing to do logistically.
Yeah, because you were going to stack them anyway.
Yeah, I was going to have to manually stack them. So the fact that they came as double talls was great, and they were really well strapped down. Anyway, long story short, Brad, it is honestly like the feeling of like when a baby is safely born. Do you remember the next day in the hospital when you're like, okay, all right, everything's fine, and then just getting 10 pallets safely here in between 2 huge rainstorms in Southern California? I was like, I'm on cloud 9. So I'm on the greatest of moods to record a podcast with you, my friend.
And along the lines of counting fingers and counting toes, you've already taken several looks through. I know you've taken many looks through your books to make sure everything is printed well, everything turned out well, and we can confirm it was a successful print run after everything that you went through.
I can confirm that it was not only a reprint of book 1, but we redid some stuff for book 1, so it was essentially a new printing, even though it's a second printing. And it all went well. All 10 fingers and 10 toes are there. And out of 347 boxes, I think only 2 took a shot in transit, which is pretty good, all things considered. If you only lose 5 or 6 books because when a box takes a hit, not all the books inside are ruined. So anyway, long story short, I'm in great spirits. I've missed you because we haven't recorded in 2 weeks. So I'm excited to say to everyone, hello everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, the very sore cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and the co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And a reminder that this show is going out live right now to our super pals and backers and friends over at patreon.com/comiclab at the $10 live gab level. You can join us and watch the show streaming live every week, record at the same time. And also, Brad, it's recorded in archives, so people can watch it later if they missed the live show, right?
Yes. And also, I just realized with last week's performance or last week's podcast, we are now entering our 5th year of podcasting with this episode.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Right? Because we started in 2018.
Into year 5?
Yes. We started in January of 2018, and we've been doing it every week without fail ever since then. So that's 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. We're into 2022 now. This is our 5th year of podcasting.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that amazing?
Brad, that's amazing. How fun, too. It's been some of the best times of my life in terms of sitting and talking comics with you. I legitimately enjoy it.
It's been really fantastic. I think it's been good for my mental health. I'm going to be completely honest with you and say I think it's been good for my mental health, because otherwise I would just be sitting here talking about this stuff to myself in an empty studio, just like an old man. Well, I don't know what these people are thinking about what the fonts they're using. I don't know what these word balloon ideas are, but I hope you're happy. I hope you're happy over there. I get to at least have somebody to talk to. I don't sound quite so crazy.
What's with kids and their kerning today? I don't understand their line art. Hi, Brad Geiger.
Oh, golly. So let's kick off are we going to kick off year number 5 with a bang? Because we have to talk about, I don't think we can avoid it. It's not going away. We've got to talk Kickstarter and their devotion to this idea of blockchain technology.
Yes. Yeah. And this one, I'll be honest, the best way I can express this is it caught me off guard.
Yeah.
In the same way, have you ever had it where a relative says, like, they have a beautiful kitchen or something? Yes. And they're like, yep, we're remodeling the kitchen. And you're like, what? Why are you remodeling? You have a gorgeous kitchen. Why would you? Or, I'm getting rid of a car and getting a new car. What? Why are you getting rid of a car? Everything at Kickstarter, in my mind, from an outsider looking in, they had built a great system. They have a great system. Yes. They have a level of trust, which is really hard to build online, both between people giving up their data and giving up their credit card, which is the 1-2 punch of trust. Yes. And frankly, I understand that blockchain technology offers a lot of interesting wrinkles to come in terms of how it can operate, the way it can operate, and what it could allow both user bases and systems to provide. But the fact that nothing was broken, in my mind, and Kickstarter suddenly came out on this and then doubled down when people said, whoa, it just seemed like PR mistake 101 to me. How about you?
I'm telling you, I know we've got, we might be doing a predictions show coming up. You and I have discussed that in vague terms. If we would have done a predictions show 2 weeks ago when they made this announcement originally, my prediction would have been, in fact, I've got it written down. They will publicly issue a mea culpa, but they'll still invest in a second company to explore blockchain. They're still going to head with it. And once the internet dies down, maybe they'll even introduce like a second Kickstarter to kind of dip the toe back in the water with the idea of maybe, bringing these together. I had it completely predicted that they were going to back down within a week of this initial announcement and do the whole, you remember, hey, you spoke and we listened. We heard you.
we heard you. It's like a big blog post that's in all caps. The subject title is "We heard you."
My prediction would have been that to see them double down and to double down in such a way. Their tweet that really caught my attention was the bottom line: we're doing this because we believe it will benefit creators and exponentially expand our ability to bring creative projects to life. We can't do this alone, and we're planning more ways to make sure your voices are heard. In that same tweet, they said, listen, we're doing this no matter what.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, but we can't do it alone.
Yeah.
How anybody approved those two sentences in the same tweet, no less, is beyond me. Because it's set up for some real easy dunking, and you see people dunking on this tweet left and right. But it also shows the dichotomy here of, we know you don't want to do this. Doesn't matter. We're going to do it anyway.
Right. It's a weird, there's a very tech bro feeling sometimes in communications of like, well, all the other tech bros are going into blockchain. Woof. Therefore, we as tech bros have to go into blockchain. And like, I get it. I'm not stupid. I understand that blockchain offers opportunities for certain open spaces in terms of trust and verifiability. I get that. I understand that. But we're also not dumb as consumers in that we understand at a basic level that most blockchain requires a small to mid-sized Brazilian hydroelectric dam to power that blockchain technology, right?
Yes.
And that even the companies that claim to have, low use energy, really what they're doing is buying carbon offsets, or they're not using less energy for the most part. The ones that I've seen, they're doing carbon offsets, they're doing this or that. It's still a terrible technology from an energy standpoint. And I understand that there are innovations coming down the pipe to use less energy consumption for blockchain. But at the time being, now is just not the time to do it. It's like tripling down on the internal combustion engine in 1905, when it's like, hey, maybe the internal combustion engine is not ready yet. Like, slow down, So I don't know. It's weird to me that they're doing this, and I'm curious, Brad, why you feel they're doing it.
Oh, I'll tell you why. Because if you go back to the Discord server when this announcement was first made, and I stand by this, I said they're dumb if they're not looking into blockchain. Okay, and I
agreed. I would actually agree with that. I would agree with that. They're dumb if they don't.
And here's the problem: it's a PR nightmare, because most people think that blockchain equals cryptocurrency and or blockchain equals NFTs, right?
Right.
And we've talked before how NFTs, I just don't see, it doesn't stand up to simple supply and demand economics. So it makes me very questionable towards it. But the truth of the matter is blockchain is a technology that is behind both cryptocurrency and NFTs, but it's also behind how Walmart, according to TheVerge.com, how Walmart tracks its produce from farmers to the stores. I mean, it's just a technology. It's like any other technology. You can use it for good things. You can use it for bad things. It's neutral. Other than, obviously, like Dave points out, the tremendous environmental impact that it has. But in terms of that, perfecting it, getting it to a place where it is better, it's just a technology. And I can understand not wanting to be caught flat-footed on this, and it's smart.
I will agree with you.
Yeah,
because you, as a company that is at least have a modicum of innovation about it, you want to constantly be dipping toes in what's coming down the pipe, what's changing, what's web. What are they calling it? Web3. What's that using?
Web3
that we can do. But the thing with Kickstarter, and you hinted at this, and I want to reinforce this, what they should have done is, we're setting up a tiny division of Kickstarter, all under the Kickstarter rubric, but it's going to be called Kickstarter Block or something, And Kickstarter Block is going to experiment with the blockchain and how we can use that efficiently, safely, in an organized way. And if you'd like to volunteer to use it, well, then maybe for small Kickstarters coming up, you could be one of our first beta users, right? And if it works, we'll roll it out into the rest of Kickstarter. And if it doesn't, we'll obviously take what we learned from it, and we'll quietly fold the project. Something like that would have been better. In the same way, I don't know, Brad, about how your local power company handles this, but my local power company says, hey, we understand that we need to transition to renewables. So if you would like to pay a little bit more every month, we will guarantee all of your energy will come from solar, wind, geothermal, and hydroelectric, right?
Yeah.
And so you can opt in. And basically, that's what Kickstarter should have done. They should have let you opt in to say, I would like to try out Kickstarter's blockchain, especially if there's some discount price that Kickstarter could have offered you to help you be a beta tester. There's ways to make it consumer friendly that they just didn't do. They're like, that's why I said it felt very tech bro, because it was like, no, fuck you. This is how we're going to do it. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
That kind of
In fact, Dave, they came so close, because the original press release said they were starting a second company. But then it said, it just said that it was a foregone conclusion. They're going to build something, and Kickstarter was going to be ported on top of it, of this blockchain technology that they developed. What a terrible thing to commit to. They could have made all this go away if they would have said, hey, we're creating the second company, we're going to look into it, and then we're going to make our decisions at that time how best to use it. They don't commit to anything. They can get the same stuff done. And again, I do think that this is worth looking into. It's not worth committing to. It's definitely worth seeing if it can be improved to particularly, number one, bring down that environmental impact. That's your job one, in my opinion. But they just said no. We're doing this. And here's my prediction number two. If there's anybody with a two brain, and I shouldn't say it that way. I was going to say, if there's anybody with two brain cells rubbing together, but I love Patreon too much to say that. I really hope that my good friends at Patreon are working on a Kickstarter clone.
Are listening.
Launch in quarter number 1 of 2022. The same way. Remember when Kickstarter tried to take the wind out of Patreon sales by announcing Drip?
Drip, yes, their favorite venereal disease company. Yes, Drip.
Yes. Right now, there's going to be a lot of people that are that are looking for a Kickstarter replacement because they're already. You see on Twitter, people, I've deleted my Kickstarter account. I'm never going to touch a Kickstarter right now. And what are we going to look for? Somebody that can handle that. What would the perfect Kickstarter replacement be? Well, we've talked about this before.
Trust.
You need somebody with trust. And number 2, a huge number of users who already have their credit card in the system.
Yes.
That's who else is that if not Patreon? It's not Indiegogo. They're a fraction. It's Patreon. If Patreon doesn't release a Kickstarter clone in quarter 1 of 2022, I'm going to be despondent. Now, mine, as long as we're talking about this, a few months ago, Patreon did say that they were going to start looking into some crypto-based stuff. There was either crypto. Yeah, they were looking into crypto. But again, all they said was, "Hey, we're looking into this." And by the way, I say again, it's smart. What did we really hate about newspapers and syndicated comics back in the 90s and the early 2000s? They refused to look into new technology. They refused to, how can I change? Newspapers, the fact that newspapers are going out of business is an absolute tragedy because they had the money, they had the capital.
They had the money,
They got beat by people in garages. Take a look at Craigslist, eBay, all this other, Amazon. They had the capital and all what they
and the user base. They had the capital and the user base. Yeah.
Yes. And all they would have had to do is make a similar decision of, hey, we're going to look into this. We're going to devote some capital to it. So I don't take it away from Patreon for looking into crypto. I don't take it away from Kickstarter for looking into blockchain. I think it's a problem when your user base says, hold on a minute, you don't listen. But they would have been dumb if they weren't at least looking into it.
And I want to make a counterpoint to my own perspective, which is Kickstarter might be right. In their quest for innovation, they might be right that blockchain is the better way to go. They might have looked at how their system works. They might have looked at the problems with the ability of their system to be broken by a hacker or a third party because it's a centralized database. And they might say, you know what, a blockchain system would be better. I am humble enough to admit that they might be right. What I'm saying is, for a company that's built on trust and built on good word of mouth, this was a profoundly bad way to go about making a technological decision that might very well have been the better decision to make. It might be the right way to go. And I'm just saying, from a communication standpoint, they really blew it from a trust and a listening standpoint with a user base that trusts them to hold on to their information, their home address, their credit card data, and their shopping history. So anyway, I hope they fix it, ? But I don't know how it's going to go. I really don't.
So now let's make this actionable just for a second, because there's going to be a lot of people that are coming down to this. And by the way, I'm one of them. I was planning a Kickstarter in the first quarter of 2022. Now what? What do I do? What advice do we give, Dave, to people who are thinking about launching a Kickstarter early and now they're like, oh gosh, what if I do this and A, my audience rebels against me, or B, so many people have walked away from Kickstarter that it doesn't go over? What advice do we give to people who are thinking about doing a Kickstarter?
Let me give you Grandpa Dave's advice. And I think this is sound advice. And I personally think this is the way to go. For the next 6 months, I can't predict beyond that, but for the next 6 months, stay the course. Use Kickstarter. Say nothing about blockchain, because 99.9% of the users will not have even heard this news, right?
That's such a good point.
We are all tapped into this. We read. Who reads a Kickstarter press release that's just an average Joe Schmo, right?
Yeah.
We're tapped into this, but the average person is not. So, from a communication standpoint, everything is fine. Because also Kickstarter has not actually started doing this yet. So they are still on their traditional system. You and your users will still be using what was available 6 months ago, 6 years ago, a version of 6 years ago. And so you can stay the course safely, I think, for the next 6 months. After that, if Kickstarter starts to get more noisy about we're going to the blockchain or we are officially now all blockchain, they're like it's going to be a Captain Crunch all berries. We're now Captain Crunch all berries. If they go that route, then you're going to have to change up your communication and your strategy. But I think for the next 6 months, stay the course, keep using Kickstarter. Don't you make any comment in the same way that you don't comment about the days when you don't post a comic, remember?
Right.
Don't draw attention to a negative that does not need to be drawn attention to because A, you can't control it, and B, Kickstarter is not actually using the blockchain right now, as far as I understand. What do you think, Brad? What do you think is the best communication to people?
I think the best communication is clear communication and often communication, right?
Okay. So you would talk to your user base about the blockchain then?
I would say, listen, well, no, I wouldn't bring it up, but just the same as you, I don't bring up, you never ask a question that you don't want to hear the answer to, right?
Right.
So you're not gonna bring it up, but I would have prepared. How am I gonna respond when somebody says Kickstarter, that's crypto, or what are they? These guys are doing horrible things. You've got to be prepared. What are you going to say about this? And Dave's right. It's not part of Kickstarter now. If it becomes part of Kickstarter, then I've got to think about how I'm doing this. But for right now, this is still the same old Kickstarter,
right?
And be prepared to communicate clearly and frankly communicate honestly. I'll be honest. This is how I feel about Kickstarter. Kickstarter changed all of our lives when it came out. In no small way. Remember, there was once a time when all of us web cartoonists were making all of our money through advertising. And publishing was tough. I launched my first book run by taking a loan out at the bank, right, and hoping that they would sell.
I forget you did that. That makes my heart gives me palpitations that you took a loan out.
Kickstarter changed all of that. Kickstarter changed
all of it,
our lives as creators. You don't walk away from that easily. I don't walk away from that easily because I remember way too well how things used to be. So you don't walk away from that. You do hold them to the fire. Like if they tomorrow threw a switch and it was all blockchain technology, well, okay, now I've got to take a look at finding a replacement because I'm not sure I want to contribute to that. Right. Yeah. But until they give us such reason to walk away, we've still got to say, hey, this is something that's worked really well for me. And this is how I would communicate it to my user base. This worked really well for me for years and years and years. Along with Patreon, these folks changed how I live as an artist. And I'm not ready to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. However, I'll be looking along with a lot of other people for a replacement if things get to a place where I just can't see moving forward. But you're right, Dave. That's not going to be in the next 3 months for sure. Certainly won't be. Probably, I think your estimate of 6 months is good too. But at least for the first quarter of 2022. I think if you've got a Kickstarter planned, I think you go forward with it. Honestly, I'm still a little bit more worried about paper shortages and shipping and companies going out of business mid-print run and stuff like that. Those are much bigger problems for me than Kickstarter itself.
Yeah, I think, and listen, even though their public communication might be all bravado at the moment, if they're even passably good executives running that company, they know that there is a pushback that they're not 100% comfortable with. So I think it's going to be a little bit more tenderly treated than it might have been in the past. I think that I have seen companies, though, have terrible communication strategies about stuff like this in the past. This might be one of those cases. But I would also say that when it comes to being a cartoonist online, take it from your favorite podcaster and Brad that some of these companies will So there will be a crisis with a company that you do business with every 12 months. Sometimes it will be like, even though Brad and I don't do business with Substack, the cartoonists on there had to answer for other artists that were on their platform. A fair critique, I suppose, but one that like, you have to, or in the case of Patreon, about 5 or 6 years back, they had problems with their security, right? In this case, Kickstarter has problems with a really badly implemented blockchain proposal, right? And so what I'm getting at in all of these cases is, if you remain a good person who is clear communicator with your user base, who treats your customers honestly and in a forthright way, you don't necessarily have to answer for all of the bad moves that a company makes. You are not personally responsible for Patreon security. And for that, what I'm getting at is, you don't have to shoot yourself in the foot and say, I'm never using Patreon again. These guys can go to hell. You can do what Brad and I did, which was patiently wait for them to fix their security holes and say, look, like you, and you're communicating with your user base, like you, I'm concerned that this was a problem. We're going to keep an eye on this, and we're going to see what we can do in the next 6 months. But for now, we'll go forward a pace, that kind of thing. So what I'm getting at is, like Kickstarter, don't shoot your own career in the foot to make a public point about like, Kickstarter needs to do better. Communicate with Kickstarter directly. That's a great option. But don't, what am I trying to say? Don't undercut the trust that your users have with you and Kickstarter collectively because of a communication problem that Kickstarter is making, when you are an honest, forthright, honorable cartoonist who's working in the best interest of your readers online. What I'm saying is, don't wrap yourself up in this messiness. Just keep your communication clear, only when it gets bad, in the sense that you have to personally answer for it. Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we made the same point with Patreon not too long ago, where we said, you can't say, oh, this is terrible. In this particular case, you can't say, oh, Kickstarter sucks, I'm deleting my Kickstarter account. And then 3 months later say, hey, support my Kickstarter. Right. You can't do that. Yes. You can't. You really, not with a straight face, you can't. Yeah. So going to DEF CON 1 is a little premature at this point. I think like Dave says, I think it's time. I think from an activism standpoint, if you want to keep the pressure up on Kickstarter, there are ways to do that. In fact, there are ways to send them messages directly. Again, I don't get into doing this stuff on social media. That's not what I think social media is for. But you can send them messages. You can keep up the pressure. You can do all kinds of stuff. Right. And then at the same time, if they throw the switch and that's a bridge too far for you, then be ready to walk. And hopefully by that time, Patreon's got their version of Drip. Yeah. I mean, what are the other options? There's GoFundMe, which is mainly used for bad health insurance moments. Yeah. But what's the other one? The other one is Indiegogo, which really has a fraction of Kickstarter's user base. And the closest available clone is Indiegogo. Yeah. But the way I feel about Indiegogo is the way I felt about my baseball gloves when I was a kid. And I'll tell you what I mean. All my teammates on my baseball team would have Rawlings gloves or Wilson's gloves. And I had Kmart brand baseball glove, and it was just not the same. It was just it's not a very good baseball glove. And so that's the way I feel about Indiegogo. Like, it works, it does the job. There's not the same imprimatur of quality or trust or solidity of a platform that Kickstarter has. And that's why I'm just amazed that Kickstarter would handle this public communication this poorly, because trust is so central to what they do. Yeah. And they, even if, as I said, even if we acknowledge that they might be right, blockchain might be the right choice for them, it was just a boneheaded way to communicate it, and then to double down on it when people were expressing righteous concerns.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. no worries.
Yeah. Listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
By the way, Dave, this is a great time to remind people that this show is being brought to them by our good friends at Wacom over at WACOM.com, the makers of the professional, powerful, portable Wacom One, which has been getting a workout over at the Geiger House this past few days. It's nice. I advise people take a little break every now and again, especially from their work during the holiday season. But I don't know about you, Dave, but my social battery gets run out really quickly when there's a lot of people in the house. And every now and again, when the downstairs got into a fevered pitch, old Brad Geiger would sneak upstairs, fire up that Wacom One, and just do a couple little sketches, until he could hear people saying, "Where did he go? Where did he go?" And then I'd scamper back downstairs and hit the eggnog again. But it was so nice to have the Wacom One there to turn to when I had a little bit too much of people.
I like how you're rolling this in like Wacom, proud sponsor of Brad's social anxiety.
You think I'm the only artist that feels this way? I guarantee you there's a lot of people that were clutching their Wacom Ones like a security blanket this year.
It is true that drawing is a lovely way to both escape reality, escape the moment, but also just to escape conversations. And all of us a little bit have that introvert or at least an ambivert where we just want to get away for a little bit. And I honestly, if I'm really hitting a stride drawing wise, I will forget to eat. I'll forget to get a glass of water. I'll really be taken away. And I love those moments. So yeah, I will, as much as I'm joking, I do agree with you. And I do agree with you that Wacom is a huge part of my career and a big part of my studio. So we give a huge shout out and a thank you to Wacom at WACOM.com, makers of the Wacom One and the full line of Cintiq products. And I got to say, Brad, a quick update for everybody on San Diego Comic-Con for me. I think you will find this interesting. Who have been very concerned about exposing myself to a bunch of vectors all at once. I did end up signing up for San Diego Comic-Con for my corner booth. Well, here's the big caveat. I read through the contract very, very slowly, and they have a 90-day out where 90 days before the show, you can get a full refund, as far as I can tell, by backing out. And so my thought is I will have a sense in April about how things are going. And that's about 90 days before Comic-Con. And I basically what I want to do, and it's something that I try to do for most of the things in my life, is that I'll say yes until I have to say no. And sometimes that causes problems, but for a lot of times it at least ups my opportunity availability. You know what I mean? Like opportunities for things or projects or people to work with or this or that. I'll say yes until for whatever reason, life or career or something gets in the way. So I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to be able to go to San Diego Comic-Con. In fact, if I was a betting man, I would say it's 80-20 that I'm not going to go, but I'm saying yes until I absolutely have to say no. And I would love to hear your quick thoughts before we move into the topic of the week.
Well, I mean, so we've been going through this conversation quite a bit at the Geiger House because this is now 2 years that I haven't made it up to Michigan to visit my parents and my family. And of course, my parents are in their 80s. So there's always that in the back of your mind. And we usually went up there at least once or sometimes twice a year. So we're trying to figure out, can we go to Michigan this year? And you know me, I am second only to you in my optimism. I always consider myself a very optimistic person until I met Dave Kellett, who buries the needle at 11 when it comes to optimism, right? You're very optimistic. I'm almost as optimistic as you. And I have been thinking, we're going to be through this by 2021. We're going to be on the other side of it. It's starting to go down. Now we're in the Omicron variant, and there's going to be another letter in the Greek alphabet after that one.
I know. I don't want to learn any more of the Greek alphabet. There's a reason why I didn't take Greek.
We're going to keep going up and down and up and down. And so I honestly think that it might as well be July, or it might as well be January now. Are things going to be noticeably better in 3 months? I don't think so. I think you're going to make the decision in April with almost exactly the same information you've got today, which is no information.
Yeah, or less than you would want, that. Right. Yes, agreed.
And my question to you is, if you get rid of San Diego, if you get rid of your booth this year, are you out for good like it was in the old days? Or
I think I might be. And that's partially it's funny you should mention that. That's partially coloring my decision, is that for those that don't know or who have never seen me at Comic-Con, I have what I like to think is an amazingly good spot. It's a really good corner spot. Great visibility. People now know it from 10 years of a recurring presence. Honestly, Brad, no one has to look at a map. They know where Dave Kellett is at San Diego Comic-Con,
Right.
And so I know that's a stupid concern, but the problem is San Diego Comic-Con has a grandfather system where once you're knocked out, you're back to the bottom of the line and you're back on the waiting list again to get back up into the show.
That 10 years of loyalty means nothing to them?
Here's the truth, Brad. I don't know. I can call up Justin and say, like, hey, Justin, come on. I've been exhibiting for 20 years consecutively and 10 in the same spot. Throw me a bone that I skipped the 1 year that there was a global pandemic. I don't know if I can do that. I'm going to try. If I don't go, I'm going to try to make that call the next year. But the thing is, I might lose that really, really sweet spot, and that would bum me out. But at the same time, I don't know if in April I'm going to be ready to say, you know what I'd like to see is 100,000 people in close proximity to me. I think that's a great idea, So I don't know which way I'm going to go. So what I'm saying is I'm saying yes until I have to say no, and I think I'm going to have to say no, that kind of
thing. Well, I'll tell you, one thing's for sure, we'll have a lot to talk about as those months roll over. It'll be interesting. We can hope for the best. That at some point it's either gonna mutate one of two ways, Dave, because we're not gonna as a community of people, we're not gonna say, okay, we need to get on top of this. Everybody wear a mask. Everybody get your shot. But it's going to come down to one of two ways. It's either going to mutate into a much less vicious strain of the virus, and it's going to be kind of like cold and flu season, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be that.
Or and Omicron may be that. It may be a version of Omicron, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Or it's going to mutate into a more vicious form of the virus, and it's just going to wipe everybody out.
Thank you for reminding us that the Black Death went through various cycles of virility and strength, Brad. That's great. Thank you.
You got two choices. You got a third choice too. Put your mask on.
So anyway, all this being said, though, I have found for the past 2 years ways to make up that money and to find that income can be in some ways recouped. Without going to Comic-Con. So will this be ruinous for the rest of my career? No. Would I genuinely miss San Diego Comic-Con if I had to start skipping it because I skipped a year when there was a pandemic and therefore was kicked out for future years? Yes, that would bum me out. But opportunity cost versus exposure to the vector of 100,000 people, I don't know. I don't think it's worth it, but we'll see how things are going in April and we'll check back in. Anyway, that is my update for this week on San Diego Comic-Con. All right, Fantastic. Brad. So jump us in on the next topic because we got a really fun question for the next one that I've been actually champing at the bit to I always want to say chomping.
This comes in from our Patreon backer, Jack Reichel, who says, "Dear treasured podcasters."
Treasured. Jack, how you do know the words to use.
Yes. The compliments will get you everywhere. Dear treasured podcasters, not to circumvent half of ComicLab's purpose, but for those of us happily committed to another ladder, making a living from comics is less significant than developing skills and completing comic projects we're eventually satisfied with. For those of us not trying to leave the Pro-Am category, how might you change the calculus for focuses on audience building, subscriptions, or any of the other rock-solid advice you give to those trying to shift into full-time comic making? Dave Kellett, I ask this to you. If you're not trying to make a living from comics, how do you change your focus on audience building or subscriptions or any of those other things?
Well, different ways to look at this. First of all, I think we should acknowledge right up front that Brad and I took our one main hobby, our one main love, and made it into a career. So our answers, maybe I shouldn't speak for Brad. My answers are going to be a little bit skewed in that I don't really, it's a big step down to my second hobby where I'm not doing that hobby for any sort of income, like big step down. Like occasionally I'll do woodworking, occasionally I'll do gardening. I don't really have a hobby that is as easily, I can't really put myself in your shoes, Jack, in the sense that having a huge love for cartooning and yet not wanting to make money from it. So I'm a little bit speaking with bad source data here, but I will say this: in a way, it's a little bit freeing to want to create comics and want to be a cartoonist and not necessarily have to make money from it or want to make money from it, because you can then produce a comic that is entirely for you, by you, with you, centered on you. And if people like it, great. And if they don't like it, also great, because you're making yourself happy. It's a hobby, not a profession. And so I think in some respects that can be hugely liberating. I think also, though, the flip side is also true. It can sometimes be so liberating that you are both not motivated to do things because there's not a monetary return, and also you're not pushing yourself because you're so cartooning in the box that is your interests, that you're not experimenting or trying out new things. I think those could be problems. Brad, what are your thoughts on this?
This is a great topic because it brings me back to our old days of Webcomics Weekly, the podcast that you and I did along with Scott Kurtz and Chris Straub. And that, if you can find the entire archive of that show on webcomics.com for free. You can listen to all those old shows. They stand up really well, and we had a great time doing them. I think everything from that show I'm very proud of. There are a couple of exceptions to that, and here's one of them. And by the way, it's forgivable because it was appropriate for the time and the place. But you'll know exactly what I mean as soon as I start talking about it. Whenever we use the term amateur,
amateur, yes, and we did use the word amateur. We didn't say amateur. We said amateur.
Every time we use the word amateur, we said it with a sneer. We talked about hobby cartoonists derisively. Because, and by the way, and there, undoubtedly, anytime we said that, it was with venom. We talked about that, and part of that was, remember, this was the same time that the National Cartoonist Society would not allow a web cartoonist to join because they didn't consider us professional,
right?
And we were very much fighting to establish ourselves as professionals, to be taken seriously, and doing honest, good work, so on and so forth. And so we felt the need, I think psychologically, we felt the need to separate ourselves from hobbyists. And we sneered every time we said hobbyist. I'd like to come away from that a little bit. In fact, it brings me joy to see Jack saying, "Hey, I'm a hobbyist, and that's all I ever want to be." And if that's you, I want to celebrate that. And I really want, I think there should be more of that. And by the way, I don't think you should tie it into capitalism. I don't think you should try to find your joy from making money on it. You should absolutely be finding your joy, if this is you, out of the self-satisfaction of a job well done. And along those lines, how would I change your focus on audience building? I'd say, hey, congratulations. You don't have to worry about audience building.
You don't. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Why would you worry about audience? By the way, if you are a hobbyist, you have and I'm going to say this without irony, you have a luxury, with a capital L, luxury of not having to worry about a bunch of the stuff that we're talking about on this show.
So I first of all, Brad, I 100% agree with you that you have the luxury of cartooning and creating specifically for an audience of one. And then if an audience comes, all the better, right? That is an absolute luxury. But let's assume for a minute that Jack and people similar to Jack are saying, no, you guys are misunderstanding. I don't want money. Money is not my motivation. Bringing people joy is my motivation. I want to maximize the ultimate amount of joy that I can give to the world through the most amount of people. And I think that's also a possibility for a lot of amateurs, is that they're saying, look, money doesn't motivate me, but spreading my art motivates me. And so let's assume for a second that that's the angle of the question. And how I think in that case, Jack, all of the similar advice that we give for people wanting to build it in a professional way is very applicable for wanting to build an audience in an amateur way. Just remove any of the money that we talk about as far as like do steps 1 through 6, and then 7 is you make money on it. Well, just ignore step 7, and most of our advice will work just fine, I think, Brad. Don't you think?
Yeah, well, not only that, but I would even suggest taking all of that stress out of it. In other words, I would say put it into the world. And yes, if you want to, exercise the 4 C's of social media to make sure that your message is getting out there, that's fine. But I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about it. Subscriptions, you've got subscriptions down here. I would cross that right off my list. I don't care about subscriptions at this point. I would make it available. But to spend a whole lot of time worrying about how your subscriptions are set up, nah. I'm serious. Take all of that stress, all the stuff that Dave and I are talking about, that we're spending a lot of time perfecting our social media approach and perfecting things like we're looking at newsletter subscriptions and Kickstarter and Patreon and audience building and all this stuff. You've got a luxury not to have that stress. Live your luxury. Don't do, I'm telling you, don't do any of that stuff. Put your work out there. If your work is good, it's going to get carried. If not, you're going to get the joy out of seeing it get better without worrying about, am I losing money? Right. So once your work gets really good, again, remember, this is another thing I feel very strongly about. You cannot hide good work on the internet.
Yeah, it'll find its way in the world. Agreed.
If you're doing good work, it's going to find its. And by the way, since you're not worried about money, it'll find an audience today, maybe next month, maybe 3 years from now. Doesn't matter, because money's not important to you. If you're doing it, you should be focused completely on self-satisfaction, and all of this other stuff that we talk about should not even, I'm saying, I'm a little different from Dave, shouldn't even be on your radar.
Yeah. No, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I will say this too, is that if we're putting this into the realm of pure hobby, let's connect this to say people that love guitars or people that love woodworking. Yeah. You can absolutely drop a few $1,000s a year on your hobby of guitars, a few $1,000s on wood and tools and chisels for woodworking, right? That kind of thing. No matter what the hobby is, I don't know, Pokemon, you can drop $1,000 on your hobby of Pokemon, whatever your hobby is. What I'm going to get at here is that if you're not looking at cartooning from a capitalist standpoint, you a little bit have to mentally prepare yourself that you're going to drop a few $1,000s on your hobby of cartooning. Because if you get a website with any hosting and it has any sort of traction, let's just say you throw it up on AWS, right? That's going to be a couple hundred to $1,000, couple thousand a year for that hosting. Let's say you need to get Dropbox to do various things for your cartooning. That might be a couple $100 a year. What I'm getting at here is that just be prepared that you might want to go pro-am just to underwrite a little bit of the cost of your hobby. But if you have a day job that's covering all the expenses, you might not care. In which case, as Brad would say, live your luxury, which I think, Brad, should be our new tagline for ComicLab.
Live your luxury.
Live your luxury. That sounds like a very Susan McTaggarty thing, doesn't it? Friends, live your luxury. Hi, it's Susan McTaggart and Brad Geiger back for another edition of ComicLab. Live your luxury, friend.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I agree. I'm telling you, you're in a great spot. You're in a great spot. So sit back and enjoy the journey. You don't have to, you're literally, like a Sunday driver. You used to say, oh, that guy's a Sunday driver. You can kind of be that. You can be out, instead of worrying about being a commuter where you've got to get to work on time, you can go out and drive your car and just watch the scenery and enjoy the wind coming in through the windshield. That's something that not a lot of people get to do. And I mean, listen, Dave and I love doing all of this stuff, but if we could, if you could say, hey, I'm going to pay your bills ongoing, Brad, you don't have to worry about social media or all this other stuff. I jump at that. right? I enjoy the business side, but don't get me wrong. If I had the luxury of just focusing on the craft, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
That'd be great. So don't. And by the way, all of this stuff that we're talking about on this show, like social media, crowdfunding, and so forth, don't think that you need all of that to be a cartoonist. Because I see this at comic conventions a lot. People cosplaying as cartoonists, right? Right, they're doing this thing and they're doing, but they don't feel like an actual cartoonist unless they're selling something. So they go to a comic convention and they cosplay as a cartoonist, right? They print all this stuff out at Kinko's and it looks like a flea market at their table, but they're cosplaying, right? You don't need that to be a cartoonist. You don't need any of that. You just need to do comics to be a cartoonist. And if this is you, then live that life. I'm jealous. Go for it.
Amen. And this is, by the way, this is part of a long-standing streak in art. In English, it comes from a French term, and I don't speak French, but it's like le art pour l'art or something like that. But it basically means art for art's sake. And that means that art, the making of art, has value independent of the result of the art or the social or political or capitalistic or ethical implications that the art might have. That just creating art has value. So even, Jack, as an outlet, just creating art just to create art is a joy-filled process, and revel in it. And as Brad would say, live your luxury, friends.
Yes. Well, listen, we've got time, Dave, for one more question. And I've got a topic that I'd love to talk about. I'd like to hear what you say about this, because we talked about on the show not too long ago about if you're really this wound up about networking at comic conventions, consider that social media networking can be a replacement for that. And the way I put it is that a lot of people, you say you're so fixated, that comic convention networking is so important to you, but then when I look at your social media, you're not networking. And why is that? I got a few messages back that said, hey, like this person that wrote, I'm not so sure that social media compares to actual networking. I've made real actual friends and colleagues at conventions, while I've only gotten boo from social media contacts. I want to offer a thought. And by the way, I don't know that this is true about anybody specifically, but it's the first thought that came to mind. If I was experiencing that, my first thought was, maybe I need to improve my social media outreach a little bit. And here's what I mean. When I'm in person and I say something, I've got 110 ways of getting nuance across. I can use my voice. I can use my eyebrows. I can use my gesture. I can lean in. I can lean back. I can increase my volume, or I can talk very softly. And by doing that, I can nuance what I'm saying to get all kinds of different gradations of emotion. And I can therefore communicate with you very, very effectively. If I'm making a social media post, all I've got are words, unless I'm doing a TikTok video or something. But I'd say 80% of our social media is what we're writing in words on that social media platform, either a post or a comment to a post. And if I'm getting that kind of response where I'm really not getting people answering back or engaging with me, I would take a moment and remember that everything you write sounds a little bit meaner than you intended. And by the way, they've done studies on email since the beginning, and they've said, hey, everything you write sounds a little bit sour.
Wow, really? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's everything. If you and by the way, especially when you're talking to younger people, like I with my kids, I wrote them, hey, please take out the trash, period. And one of my kids comes up to me and says, are you mad at me? I go, no, I just want you to take out the trash. Well, the way you wrote that looks like you're mad at me. I said, why? Well, you used a period. I go, really? Using a period means I'm mad? Well, yes, the difference between please take out the trash and please take out the trash. I'm like, I didn't even know that, right? And you can throw emojis and all that other stuff in. I get it. But take a moment, if you're really getting this kind of dichotomy between what you're getting in person and what you're getting on social media, and consider that maybe you need to think a little bit more about your word usage, think about how your phrases are coming across, think about improving your writing a little bit so that maybe, and again, I don't know that this is true about any one individual, but it's the first thought that came to my mind. Maybe you're just not coming across very well. Maybe you sound in a way that you're not intending. What do you think about that thought, Dave?
I agree with you. I agree with you that it's very easy for human hearts, for a bunch of baggage that's on the reader's heart, to put emphasis onto written text that is not there, right? I agree with you that even if they're both coming, the reader and the writer and the reader are coming at it with equally pure intentions. I think pure text can still be misread. I agree with you there. But I think central to the question asker's question, I still kind of agree that true socializing is best cemented with at least one physical in-person meeting. Mm-hmm. I personally think I think there's a reason why companies still send salespeople on flights for the first meeting at least, and then they can Zoom forever after that, because they need to cement it physically. Companies spend tens of thousands of dollars a year to send salespeople physically out to go to somebody, because they know that someone physically there can move more mountains than something by an email or text or Zoom, right? So I personally agree that that's the case. But here's the thing. Right now, we don't live in that world. Right. We're all stuck on text. So even if I'm right, or even if Brad's wrong and I'm right, it doesn't matter, because 365 days a year, you have access to social media. Tops 2 days a year, 3 days a year, you have access to a Comic-Con. So even if I'm right, we've still got to listen to Brad, because Brad's saying, look, you've got to use the tool that you've got 365 days a year, which is social media. Yeah. So I think Brad is in essence right, even if he's wrong, because we've got to learn how to use this. It's right there in front of us. It's there on a day-to-day basis. And I will say that there are people for whom I eventually did meet 5-10 years later, but I cemented at least a professional amicability via text and tweets and social media, even before I met them. So is it rarer? Yes, I will think it's rarer. I honestly think that even if I've met people once, it's so much easier for me to interact with them on social media than if I've only met them on text. Because there's so much context and nuance and small idiosyncrasies that you pick up on a physical level of, like, I know you, I know who you are, I know what kind of person you are. I get it. I see the way you carry your posture. I see the way you dress. I see the way, all that sort of stuff. All the 1,000, like Brad said, 1,000 little nuanced messages that a human can send another human in physical form. You get all that in like a micro dose within a couple of minutes of talking to them, right? And every time thereafter, it's easier to talk to them on social media. But to Brad's point, listen, even right now, we don't have that. And you have access to this thing for 365 days a year. So use that and use it well.
Absolutely. Well, listen, there's never a better place to end the show than when Dave says that I'm right, even when I'm wrong. That's I'll take it. I'm going to have T-shirts made up. So I know when a good time to say this is, and this is a good time to say it. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by our pal Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions, who we are excited to go into year 5 with over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you can rate the show on Spotify. David, we're getting to have a really significant listener base on Spotify. I look at the numbers every week, and it astounds me. So we've got to talk to our Spotify listeners. They just opened up rating the show, and you could do us a huge favor, help the show get to even more people by giving us a nice 5-star reading over there.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. In some cases, and I'll be honest, I don't quite understand why Spotify does it this way.
Yeah.
When you're logged in through the web, sometimes it allows you the ability to rate the podcast. Sometimes it doesn't. When you're logged in through the app, sometimes you have to physically search for the word ComicLab, then go in that way. But if you could do us a solid and just take a second and try one or two different versions, Brad, do you understand yet why Spotify has that, where sometimes the rating is hidden, the ability to rate?
So what it is this is a new feature that they're rolling out. So it's you know how it is when they roll out a new feature. Sometimes you've got to close the app and relaunch it. Sometimes there's a whole bunch of things that have to do with browser settings that get refreshed. So that's a lot of it. It's just that this is a new thing. Eventually, you're going to see that star rating over there, and when you do, just jump right over and give us a 5-star.
But here's the thing: if we can jump out early on this, gang, we can beat those NPR art podcasts.
Yes.
We can get to the top of the art podcasting list. Don't let NPR win. Don't let National Public Radio win.
Dave's joking, but I'm serious. We've been doing this for so long, and nothing would make me happier to see Spotify replace Apple Podcasts, because Apple Podcast rating system is so Byzantine. I know that we should be higher just on the fact that there's so many people rating the show, following us on Patreon. I know you're there, and when I put in a search for comics or web comics and I look at the returns on Apple Podcasts, it makes me crazy. So here's our chance to get out in front of Spotify, get in on the ground floor. Get on the ground floor. And maybe we can be there when you put comics into a search. Holy cow. I've given up looking at Apple Podcasts. I know. And then you'll get a show on there that hasn't updated in 5 years. And it's like, really? This is above us? 5 years ago, they stopped. So, rate us on Spotify, for crying out loud.
And with a huge thank you to everyone that does rate us on Spotify, I will say ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/rate us on Spotify. I loved your idea of live your luxury. That made me laugh.
Live your luxury.
If there's the most non-Brad Geiger thing I've ever heard said was live your luxury. It sounds like just phrases that you don't hear out of Brad Geiger's voice. So when you told Jack to live your luxury, that made me laugh. Hi, everyone. Brad Geiger here. And as I always say, live your luxury. Meanwhile, he's wearing a 6-year-old T-shirt that he got at Comic-Con for free. Live your luxury, everyone. Mismatching socks.
This is brand new. The printing is still crisp on this.